Thank you all for joining us. This next segment is on personal stories and inclusive leadership. And what this is intended to tell is a story. We all come to Reed Smith with our own personal experiences, with our own life experiences, with our own stories. And what we bring to Reed Smith kind of frames our experiences there. We've all walked a different path to get here. And some of us capitalize on those differences, some of us highlight them. Others of us try to tamp them down or mute them a little bit. And we do that even though we know we are at our best, when we can be our true self, when we can be our most authentic self. So this panel is going to our colleagues are going to share some of their personal stories with us and explain how their own personal experiences have framed their time at Reed Smith. I'm going to introduce the panel. On my left is Maytak Chin. She's from our San Francisco office in the Global Commercial Disputes Group. I think that's right. I think that's what it's called now. And next is Anthony Crawford. He's from our New York office in the Insurance Recovery Group. And Anthony had a prior life to Reed Smith. He was, for 11 and a half years, he was in the US Marine Corps as an officer, and he was a helicopter pilot. Next to Anthony is Courtney Ofosu from our Chicago office in the Labor and Employment Group. And Courtney has been recognized for the past 5 years by Super Lawyer as one of Chicago's rising stars in employment litigation. Next to Courtney is Tim Carr Winsky. Tim is also from our Chicago office in the Global Corporate Disputes Group. Tim has been recognized by California Lawyer as one of its Attorneys of the Year and recognized by the ACLU for receiving one of its awards for social justice. And last but not least is Sarah Ronsky from our DC office. She is in our International Trade and National Security Group. And Sarah also has been recognized by Super Lawyer for the past 5 years as one of DC's rising stars for government contracts. And with that, we're going to get into our personal stories, and we're going to ask Maytak to start.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maytak, and currently my practice focuses on business torts and unfair competition, with emphasis on trade secrets litigation involving highly advanced technology. I'm homegrown, summered through, and I know that's rare in an industry or has become more rare to date. My career has taken lots of twists and turns over the past 7 years I've been with the firm. I started out as a products liability attorney, and then my practice evolved to litigating breach of fiduciary duty cases. And then I started representing public pension funds, doing my own writs and appeals. And then more recently, my practice has taken a more international flair. I litigated a trade secrets case against a Chinese company, took it to trial, and right now I am representing a Finnish company in a shareholder dispute. So while it looks like my career has really been kind of scattered throughout the years, it actually really hasn't. I've been very purposeful and deliberate with every engagement I've taken on, and I'll explain why. I come from an immigrant family with very humble beginnings. My mother is a Chinese immigrant, but she has a deeper backstory. She, after World War II, or during World War II, my great-grandparents decided to split the family up rather than risk all dying together. And so my great-grandmother took two of the daughters, married an American sailor for safety, and came to the United States. My grandfather took my grandmother and was wifeless after the war and needed someone to take care of him. And so he asked my grandmother, who had 8 children, to give one of her kids up to take care of him in old age in rural China. And that was my mom. So she had to leave Hong Kong at a very young age to go care for my great-grandfather in China, separate from the rest of her family. My father is disabled and grew up in Guam. For a long time, they thought he was dumb, but it turns out he's hearing impaired, and they didn't realize that until, in school they have that test where you have to raise your hand if you hear the beep. He just never raised his hand, and they figured out he couldn't hear. And then he did very well in school. So with that, being the eldest of 4, I've always had to fend for myself and for my family. I always had to be kind of a conduit and explain things to my parents, where it was unusual situation, I would say, where the child is more or less guiding their parents rather than the other way around. So needless to say, I didn't come from a family of lawyers or professionals, and so I had to kind of learn the ropes on my own. When I was a summer associate, I wasn't sure what to be or how to act, really, so what it meant to be professional was unknown to me. So what I did was had my girlfriend cut my hair, and I was like, hey, I'm starting this new summer associate thing. Can you make me look more professional? She gave me a bob and bangs. And it was the most hideous haircut I've ever had. So like, if you ever see a picture of me in my summer, it was not good. On top of that, I was the only, I summered with 5 white men, and it was 5 white men and me, and they were all really tall. So that same summer, I purchased a bunch of 5-inch heels, thinking that I needed to be eye level with them to fit in a little bit better. Since then, Christina knows I don't usually wear 5-inch heels anymore, but
only when necessary.
Only when necessary, when I want to be tall. So coming to the firm and being able to survive in a large law firm like this, you definitely need to make friends. You have to have some friends to keep you grounded, and you also have to have mentors. And so every single engagement that I took on was with an attorney that I respected and who was willing to mentor me. And so that explains why my practice has been so varied over the years. Mentorship is really important, and I think that it's incumbent on us to pay it forward to the next generation. I worked with a variety of attorneys across a number of different teams, and I learned from every one of them. One of them being Will Weltman, who's over there. He taught me a lot about how to manage up and manage down and supervise and deal with junior associates and oversee their work. And we worked on that trade secrets case together. We took it to trial, got a $66 million jury verdict and a worldwide injunction, so that was good. But during trial, we used to have this running joke, which was that there were 50 shades of Maytack, depending on the day or the event that we were doing. Whether, if I'm in court, I'm a kind of a different person. If I'm in the war room, I'm a very different person. If I'm with the client, if I'm doing witness prep, I can take on different personalities and use different words and stuff. And that is in large part, that joke was based in large part on my code switching, where I would change my vernacular based on what I was doing.
So when you refer to the 50 shades of Maytack and the code switching, what could you tell the audience as to how can they better support somebody in your situation, a colleague like you that's in your situation, to make that code switching either easier, not necessary?
Well, I think it was important because they recognized it. So, and we kind of talked about it a little bit more, and I felt like I could be myself. Especially when you're in the trenches at trial, like you don't want to have to deal with putting on this whole other person and bringing this whole other person to the war room all the time when, you really just have to be focusing on expert, outlines and examinations. So I think one piece of advice I'd probably give people is to acknowledge it and let people just know that they can be themselves, and that what matters most is your work product, not necessarily who you are.
Right. And I think that's going to be a common theme that runs through our discussion today, is the ability just to have conversations very frankly and very honestly makes everything around our workspace a lot easier, a lot less complicated. So thanks, Maytack. Anthony, do you want to share your story?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony Crawford. I am an associate here in New York, actually, in the insurance recovery group. I started out here in Philadelphia, actually, as a summer associate, and then later on moved to New York after my wife got a job there. For those of you who have talked to me, or if you haven't, it only takes about 5 seconds of speaking to me to know that I am a passionate policyholder advocate. I'm a true believer. I know insurance doesn't seem like the most exciting thing. I can tell you that reading insurance contracts is absolutely boring, but there's a whole nother aspect of it in advocating for policyholders that is really, really worthwhile. As Christina mentioned, prior to becoming an attorney, many, many pounds lighter, many years ago, I was an officer in the Marine Corps. I was commissioned in 1998, and I stayed in until about 2009, where I had the decision to either go to law school or go to Afghanistan. Now, by the look on some of your faces, you're sitting there like, why would that ever be a choice? My now wife, girlfriend at the time, said the same thing when she was actually the tipping point that got me to decide to go to law school. My career as a lawyer, I think, has largely been influenced by my experiences in the military. I have had a chance to meet and go to many different places, meet many, many different peoples from many different walks of life. I have seen some beautiful locales in the tropical islands. I have seen horrible locales in deserts that I would never, ever recommend anyone going to. As you can imagine, with the military experience, there's time management issues and skills that you learn that help as an attorney. So as I transitioned out of the Marine Corps and into being a lawyer, being a civilian again, there were sort of some growing pains that I had to learn to deal with. I learned that the adversarial process doesn't really mean exactly what that sounds like. My mentor said to me one time, it's like, you're really mean to other attorneys. I'm like, aren't we supposed to be adversarial? It's like, no, that is not what that means. And so that was an interesting experience. The other thing, though, is that it was helpful to me is, sort of, I would say, having a matter of perspective. So there are times where people will come in and say, oh, this is a big fire drill, and we got to get this done, and blah, and I'm like, is anybody shooting at us? No? Okay, cool. All right, what do we need to do now? And it's not to say not to be professional, but it's just a matter of like, take a breath, calm down. All right, let's just look and see what we have to do. So in the vein of this panel, when I think about diversity, I found that I don't often think about numbers, and I'll give you a little reason why. I was a pilot, I was a helicopter pilot in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, at the time I was in, about 170,000 people. Of that, only 10%, about 17,000 are, hopefully I did the math right, are officers. You need to be an officer to be a pilot. There's only about 3,000 pilots in the Marine Corps. Bottom line is, in a squadron, I'm probably the only black pilot. So it wasn't so much numbers for me, but it was the experience, and not to say that numbers don't matter and we should always strive if that's a metric, as a metric to achieve that, but more so I came to appreciate what diversity brings. I mean, Marines come from all different walks of life. You'll have a Marine from downtown Brooklyn, a Marine from east of nowhere, Iowa. Somehow they come together for a common purpose and are able to work together with each other and achieve the mission that they're supposed to achieve. And that, more so than anything else, I see as just that goal that we should strive to with promoting diversity, that diversity of thought, that diversity of experience, and how that enhances whatever it is we're doing. And I always big fan of Johnny, and the thing that he said was diversity is not just adding one more minority to the organization. It's also the inclusiveness piece. And that I have found more so than anything else to be very true. It's not enough just to be here. There has to be some inclusion as well. And on the work level, like that the partners and now the associates in here that will be partners and everything, work level, yes, absolutely. Make sure that you involve diverse associates in giving them substantive work, putting them in front of clients. There's also a social component to this as well. And one of the things that I've always thought is that as you look at your diverse attorneys, don't assume that they're into something or not into something based on how they look or who they are. Because you should give them the opportunity to say no versus you saying no for them. For example, you look at me, I'm an African-American male, you might say, hey, he doesn't really go golfing. That's an assumption. It shouldn't be an assumption that you make. it actually is true. I'd rather watch paint dry than go golf because am really terrible at it. But you never know what a person is bringing and what they're involved with until you actually talk to them. And you do them a disservice because that golf outing with the client, that you assume that this diverse associate wouldn't be into, you may have cut them out of an opportunity to get a chance to interact with a client. Another assumption that I was thinking about is like, going smoking cigars with a client or something like that. If you have female associates and you make that assumption that that's not something that they would be into. Well, guess what? I've learned more about cigars from women than I've ever learned from any man. So don't, it's the onus is up on us as the future leaders of this firm is to make sure that we are aware of these things and that we don't fall into those traps, and make sure that we make those efforts to offer these opportunities to your diverse associates and not take it away by making assumptions.
Right, and that's, Anthony, you touch on a really important piece, I think, which is the difference between diversity and inclusion. You're sitting here as an African American man, as a veteran, and it's not about those numbers. I mean, that only gets us part of the way there. I was sitting in on a talk, and a woman was explaining the difference between diversity and inclusion, and she said the difference is diversity is being asked to the dance, and inclusion is being asked to dance. And that's really, that kind of it all made sense for me. And you gave some examples of where the inclusion piece might be missing. What would be your big takeaway for the audience? Is that, some things to keep in mind about how you gave some. Are there any others you want to add about how you can be more inclusive with your colleagues, with people that you might not ordinarily include in your pitches or your discussions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was truly this, is that just not making assumptions, because you never know until you ask what that person is about. I was thinking about all of the different things that I'm into. I've been scuba diving for the last 20 years. I am weirdly into AFI, and for those in the room that know what that is, it's like, and you look at me and you're like, wow, really? That's something that you like? I'll explain later for those that want to know. So the biggest thing is that, yes, don't make assumptions.
Great, thanks. Courtney.
Hi everyone, my name is Courtney Ofosu. I am a senior associate in the Labor and Employment Group in Chicago. My practice for the last 6 or so years has primarily focused on representing employers in state and federal courts, as well as before administrative agencies, and defending in actions involving claims of harassment, retaliation, discrimination, whistleblower actions. I also counsel clients on a wide variety of employment issues, including leave and accommodation requests, counseling employers on their policies and their handbooks, employment agreements, and the like. Like some of you in this audience and some of us on the panel, I am one of the first in my family to become a lawyer. However, I look at examples of people in my family, particularly my grandmothers, and I see in them many firsts and examples of trailblazers. My grandmother on my father's side was born and raised in Ghana, West Africa, and when she was growing up, and as is probably the case today, there's no such thing as public education. And so any child who wanted to receive a formal education had to have parents or other family members who could pay for them to attend school. And my grandmother was one of 2 children in her family who was able to receive a formal education. And she came to the United States, worked as a nurse, and was able to support not just her immediate family, but also her siblings and their children who remained in Ghana. And as a result of the education she received and her occupation and her financial support of family members and others back home, when she came back to Ghana to retire, She was seen as not just a leader within her family, but also a leader within her immediate community and also in the village in which she was raised. On my mother's side, my grandmother has a bit of a different story. She was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, and like a lot of Black American families at the time when she was growing up, her family moved north to Chicago and resided in a neighborhood that we now know as Little Italy. And for those of you from Chicago, you know that now Little Italy is kind of seen as a trendy, sort of yuppie area, but it wasn't so back then. It was actually quite poor, and her parents didn't have much. She would tell me stories about the summertime when she would scrounge up, 5 or 10 cents so she could buy herself an Italian ice, and she, was able to do that, a handful of times in the summer. And so obviously to me, the thought of, having to save up a nickel or a dime for a treat is not familiar to me, and it's certainly is not and will not be familiar to my child. But that was her experience, and she grew up, became a social worker helping children and families, and she was able to retire early and pursue her passion, which for most older folks is antiquing. And she opened an antique store that she still runs today. And some of her customers include members of some of the oldest and wealthiest families in Chicago, TV personalities. I remember one time she mentioned that she sold pieces for a set that was used in a John Malkovich production. So I can't lose sight of the fact that being able to attend law school, get a law degree, work at a large law firm in Chicago, and be where I am is something that I certainly cannot take for granted. But I look to those two women and other folks in my family, and know that because of the life and the path that they were able to create with themselves, despite having very limited resources, that it's certainly possible.
So you highlight your two grandmothers as being a pretty key component of your personal story, and do you think it was their personality, their grit, or was it the support they had around them or the community they had around them that kind of pushed them to where they are? And has that been instructive to you, and as far as your experiences moving into the professional world?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think for my grandmother in Ghana, because of the fact that so few people were able to receive an education, and that there were so many financial resources devoted to getting her a formal education, success, I suspect, in her mind was it needed to happen. She needed to succeed to sort of honor the sacrifices that her parents and her family members made for her. Thinking about my grandmother on my mother's side, I saw her use community to be able to create the life that she ultimately wanted. I saw her forge relationships with people who didn't seem to have anything in common with her. And as I graduated law school, worked in a law firm, a large law firm, there weren't many people who looked like me working as attorneys in big law in Chicago. And so I too had to sort of find what I thought were unlikely allies. And what I discovered was that when I took the time to get to know the lawyers that I worked with who didn't necessarily look like me, and when those lawyers were open to getting to know who I was, that we found commonalities that I didn't assume existed. And so, being able to forge that connection and build that connection, I think really resulted in having successful professional working relationships that were mutually beneficial.
Great. Yeah, and I think that in and of itself is a great lesson. It goes both ways, right? It's us having to push ourselves to stretch a little bit, and people that come from different backgrounds, having to do the same to meet us halfway, and, maybe is part of the story.
Exactly.
Thanks, Courtney. Tim, do you want to share your story?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Carr Winsky. I'm a litigator in the Chicago office. I'm going to fall back on litigator instead of the new names. Sounds screwed up. I do class action defense as my main focus. And I also do a fair amount of just more standard commercial litigation, especially around distribution, relationships, and franchising. So if you're wondering what the white guy is doing up there on the diversity panel, I'm the gay one, and I say that and I joke around, but I think that as a diverse attorney, for me, that doesn't become a reality unless I actually come out. I actually have to articulate for people my identity as a gay man before it's official in people's eyes, and for some people before they even know, depending on how good their gaydar is. And and it's a bit of a cliche among members of the LGBT community, but as a gay man, I actually have to come out all the time. It isn't something that you do once in your youth, maybe, but it can be pretty frequent, sometimes daily. You find yourself in a situation where you get to a moment in that conversation when you have to, you're deciding what to say next, and you're like, oh, this conversation is leading in a direction that I'm about to out myself. Do I want to do that? And you'll be at the grocery store, and the cashier will be like, how was your Memorial Day? And you could lie and be like, oh, it was great, right? Or you can say, oh no, it was terrible. I had to help my husband's father move out of his apartment because it's full of antiques. And this isn't being recorded. My husband's not going to see this, I hope. We get in trouble.
It is, actually.
Or you can choose, or I can choose in that moment as I head down that path to use genderless terms. I can just say my father-in-law's apartment. And then I'm kind of thinking to myself, but why didn't I want to come out in that moment? You're kind of like, you start second guessing yourself a little bit. But you just reach those decision points all the time. I think that professionally, the decision, the calculus on whether or not to come out it can be much more complicated. Sometimes it can be really easy. So for me, I was very out in my resume. Definitely wanted all employers to know that I was gay. My theory is I'd rather be discriminated against in hiring than discriminated against in promotion. So to put all out there and have that be it. But it's harder with like clients. Because if your client is a corporate client, corporate clients, they love the gays, but if it's a small business or an individual, you may not have enough information, or you may even start making assumptions about the information you have, which might be quite limited. Like, oh, is this something that would be a safe thing to do, or am I jeopardizing a relationship? And would that be fair to my colleagues? Is it and if I think someone might not be okay with it, and then that kind of makes me want to come out more, almost as a political kind of form of activism. But is that fair to your colleagues? So something that I think about a lot more than you'd think.
So Tim, the way you describe your story, it almost makes me think that you could lead this double life if you wanted to. You're a white man, and you could blend in quite easily if you choose not to out yourself or be open about your true self, right? How does that, what could you help the audience understand about how's the best way to approach that, whether it's in the office, whether it's with respect to pitches that you're making with colleagues? How do we handle that best for you?
I'll say that for, that's a great question. So I would say for well, for me, first I'll say me personally, then me in general. For me, it's always been very easy. I came out when I was, in high school, which was relatively unusual at the time, and and attended a Catholic university, and then was pretty politically involved in trying to get a gay rights group recognized on campus, and so I'm pretty familiar. And for me, you don't necessarily do that through protests so much as having lots and lots of conversations with people and meeting them on their level to understand what their kind of attitudes are, so that you can invite them into your world too, and they can hear your perspective and experience. And I also had this pretty dramatic, not dramatic, but I basically had to come out to like all of my clients at once because I had changed my last name when I got married, which is unusual for men. My husband and I combined our names. My last name, for my first 5 years here, I was Tim Carraher. So maybe some people are like, oh, wait, that guy. And my husband's last name was Winsky, and so we became the Carr Winskys. And so I had to tell all my clients then. So that was fun, and people love talking about that. So they think that's fun. So that was kind of an ease in. When you have like the new pitch, the new client, I'll say if you're dealing with somebody who is out at work, definitely engage and have the conversation with them about the best way to approach different client relationships, and whether or not it makes sense, and maybe kind of strategize around it, because a lot of times you'll have like a client will there'll be a call and they'll say, yeah, they want the participation of, they want to staff their cases with the diverse attorneys, and it isn't true that you can go on my bio and even now it's still not there that just like says like gay, but you want to find some way but you want to communicate that, and so you may do that by have the conversation, don't kind of dance around the issue. Say, hey, would you be comfortable if we try to strategize a way for that to be part of this conversation, because they've asked. They're actually interested in hiring people who are diverse for this job. And then you can maybe change part of the marketing material to highlight something, to kind of to educate the client that that's something that's true for you.
Thanks. Anything else you want to share?
That's what I got.
Hope we covered it. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Ronsky, and I'm a mom. Can't pretend I'm not. My daughter Hyla is 4. My son Eli is 1, and they are little handprints on my heart and soul, because raising my kids and teaching them and watching them grow up has been the most darling, precious, personally fulfilling chapter of my life. I love it, and that is my authentic self. I also like being an attorney. I am smart and talented and good at my job, but I have struggled tremendously at making these two parts of my life work, and feeling like the answer is that I have to walk away from this job, because this job is hard. Whether you're a man or a woman, all of us in this room have hard, demanding jobs. But having kids is also hard and demanding for moms and dads. But statistically, that juggle continues to disproportionately affect women on partnership track at big law firms. Reed Smith isn't immune to it. They shared last year that 49%, or almost half of our associates, are women, but less than a quarter of our partners are women. And that's about average for all major law firms. It's something that we are all struggling with and trying to figure out how to address, because finding that balance where we can feel like we are succeeding here at work and succeeding in our personal life at home is hard and personal, and it's very difficult to find the answer there. I'm still working on the answer, but for me, It has been a lot of work involving self-reflection. What does success mean and look like for me, and figuring out how to shape and shift my practice in a way that is going to work with the most important thing to me, my family life. That's still hard. And I even have a wonderful husband who's my equal in parenting. It's just hard. I am an international trade attorney. Not my background. My background is in complex litigation, the aggressive, unyielding kind. I actually did that for 7 years at another firm before I came to Reed Smith. I had a straight path to promotion there, and I loved that firm. But after my daughter Hyla was born, it became increasingly difficult to make that kind of work, those demands, the pressures at all hours, work with what I was trying to accomplish at home in my personal life. And so when I was about 6 months away from being put up for partner, I took a leap of faith. I had an offer to come to Reed Smith and do more regulatory and compliance work, still sophisticated and challenging, but a little bit less of the constant intensity that I was struggling so much with. And I took that leap in 2016. I came to Reed Smith and I started over. I had no metrics, no relationships, no body of work behind me to prove who I was. And I had to work for a couple of years at building that up again in a new place and getting myself on a path upward again. And I think we've gotten there. I love who I'm working with, but meanwhile, that litigation that I was trying so hard to avoid crept right back into my role, in large part because I had this skill set and I was needed, and that's where I wound up. Particularly about a year ago, last May, I came back from maternity leave after baby number 2, and I walked right into a very busy practice where I was quickly and abruptly overloaded with work, managing significant litigation that was aggressive, high stakes, a lot of pressure, and I just imploded like a dying star. I feel it's very vulnerable to talk about this because I'm worried you're going to hear this and be like, what's the big deal? We all are under pressure. Nobody likes deadlines. This job's hard for everyone. But when you have demands like that, specifically that kind of pressure where, I just felt like every hour, day in and day out, I was at work just waiting for the next bomb to come on me and fire drill to clean up. And then at home, I was not sleeping because baby, and working until 2 or 3 a.m., up the rest of the night with Eli, who did not sleep, and trying to breastfeed, pump at work, forgetting to pump because I was so consumed by my workload. Emotionally dealing with now being split between 2 kids and figuring out how to give my heart to both of my children who both demand and need their mom. It was a very, very difficult time, and I just spiraled downward. It was fast and it was prolonged. I told partners I wanted to leave. I told the chair of my group I didn't want to make partner because there's no way it would ever get better. I think I saw Sandy Thomas in the hall and told him my life was terrible. I might have been blacked out at that point, but just, in short, I spent much of 2018 in crisis. The truth is that when you have a job as demanding as this and life at home is equally or more demanding, something has to yield to the other. Maybe not the same every day. Sometimes work might get more attention, and sometimes your family is coming up on top. But for me, when it's those prolonged periods where the most precious thing to me, my family, is constantly yielding to this job, that's when the scary questions come in. What am I doing this for? And how do I get out? Fortunately for me, I was surrounded by people here who wanted me to succeed and who wanted to keep my talent and keep me here. And that was a whole lot of people, but in particular, it included my practice chair, Larry Block, who not only bore the brunt of my tears for months, but worked with me for months, always listened until ultimately we made the decision that I was going to shift to a different team where I would get to be 100% devoted to the regulatory and investigation work that I wanted to be doing and I would be excelling in. And for Larry to do that, I mean, Larry hired me specifically to be on his team, and I know he needed me and was under a crush of work, and for him to be willing to not only let me go, but initiate that move speaks volumes to how partners can see different ways to put the needs of our associates first, like whatever you're going through, and do what's best for the firm as a whole and for that person as a whole, even though it might not be what's best for them. It has been I will probably always remember this as one of the biggest differences in my career, because now I can tell you I'm in a place where I'm thriving again at work and I'm doing what I want to be doing and should be doing. And it's the first time in years I think I have felt that. It's incredible. Still hard. There's always going to be things I struggle with. I still struggle with guilt when I work late, guilt when I leave early. I struggle with feeling disconnected or missing out of what's going on in my kids' days. That's always going to be something I juggle with. I still struggle with my 1-year-old who, no exaggeration, every week I get the sick call from daycare that he either has a fever or is puking, and I gotta scramble, and my husband and I have to juggle the day and pick up Eli again. And it's honestly been at the point where I am recently have just been hiding that I'm home with the sick Eli, because I almost feel like no one would believe me if I told you again, yes, he's puked all over me, and yeah, now I've got the bug too. So those are, it's just, regardless, I'm still going to be struggling with that. But I'm still trying to work through it all. That's where we get.
Yeah, thanks. And I told you this yesterday, and I feel like I will call you once a week just to tell you it gets easier.
Right.
I have a 17-year-old, almost 18-year-old, and I have a 16-year-old, and to hear your story resonated so much with me, because it's like I could think back to yesterday when it was just like, how am I going to do this for a day? Honestly, and it's just, you get to that point where nothing makes sense anymore. Yeah. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? Anyways, it gets better, and I will remind you of that. So, one of my initiatives for Winners is to include men more and to bring men more into our programs, into our training, into our sessions, into our social things that we do. Talk to us a little bit about the role of men and paternity leave, and what your view is on that, and how that plays into the dynamic of working women in the office.
Right. Well, the unique thing about this issue is there is something that we all can work on together, men and women, because this is very much an equality issue. It doesn't just have to be something that women, just like we've all talked about today, open discussion with everyone is going to help. Sponsorship, mentorship with everyone is going to help. How we view each other, how we measure each other, helps by just openly talking about these issues. And one in particular is that if you're a man and you're going to be a dad, take paternity leave. If you're in a leadership position or just working with colleagues, encourage other men to take paternity leave. I continue to be surprised at how many of our male associates decline paternity leave or don't take the full extent because they feel that work is just too busy and they can't leave for that long. And while I'm sure that's the best of intentions, that hurts me. That hurts our working moms, because it sends an unconscious message that caregiving, woman's responsibility. Men, invaluable to our work. Women, not so much. I know you guys would never intend that, but that is what happens. Is it places the burden and the challenges of returning from leave solely on the women, and this will continue to be an issue that particularly hits women hard, notwithstanding the overwhelming data and science that suggests you should take paternity leave. It's good. But just from an equality standpoint in our firm, it helps so much. If you're nervous about how to approach that conversation, talk to any of us and we'll help you, because I'm sure that there's unique pressures that dads feel too. But again, this is something we should all be talking about together to normalize it. It shouldn't be abnormal that we have kids. That's like a very common part of life, is to have children. And the fact that I'm a mom and an abnormality in so many firms is something I think we can change. Let's change it together. This is something that we all can change together.
That's right. And Anthony, you're a dad. I mean, what's your perspective on paternity leave and taking time away?
So, fortunately, yes, I am a dad. My little girl will be 8 months next week. And I took paternity leave, a portion of it now, and I'm planning on taking the rest a little bit later on, modeled much like Spencer Wing, who I looked to, had taken a little bit of paternity leave before me, so I was able to reach out to him and ask him how that worked. And I'll forever be grateful to Max Lewick, as one of the people that helped assist me while I was out and covering my cases. So there's a couple ways I look at this, and I'll be quick because I know we're running out of time on this program, is that, sort of mentality, and I even embraced this a little bit before I took my leave, was thinking about, oh my God, all my cases, will I be able to, what will happen to all of this? And I think back on, back in the Marine Corps, I had a Marine that worked for me. He was very, very good at his job, and he wanted to take some time off to do some training for his own development. And my initial thought was, oh God, no, he can't go because my shop, he has to be here. He's a good worker. And old warrant officer pulled me aside and said, sir, you know what? If you can't let that Marine go to better himself, then you need to put a bodyguard on him because, your life will fall apart. And that always resonated with me. And what it basically the point is that the firm will still be here when I get back. There are people covering my cases. Reed Smith's been in business for a long time before I got here. I went out on leave, came back. Reed Smith was still here. Amazing. And it's not to say don't be professional, just make sure you have your work covered and everything. And the other part that is, to me, is very personal, in that Reed Smith has given me the gift of 10 weeks to form and create bonds with my little girl. What kind of man, what kind of father would I be if I didn't take that gift? How can I look at my daughters in her eyes and say, no, you're not worth that? Okay, so that's why I believe in it, and that's why I took it, and that's why we'll continue to take the rest of it, because it's very important, and it is a gift that Reed Smith has given us. So.
Right, and you don't get that time back. You get a chance
You'll never
to take it once, and you really don't want to have to think like, God, I wish I had taken that 10 weeks off. So that's our panel. A couple of things. I want to thank our panel very much. I think it takes a lot of bravery to get up on a stage like this and share a real personal piece of your life, a very vulnerable piece of your life. It's not something that we do in this job very often, if at all, unless we're behind closed doors doing it with somebody in our office. So thank you for that. To the audience, what I would ask of you is if there's somebody on the stage, one of your colleagues that you don't know, take the opportunity to introduce yourself to him or her. But beyond that, take this all back to your own offices and, again, stretch yourselves a little bit. Talk to people who you wouldn't typically talk to, who aren't like you, who don't look like you, who don't do the things you do. And try to put this into action, because I think in the end, it's those personal connections that really make Reed Smith stand apart from other firms. I think it's what, I've worked at 3 other firms, and it's different here. It is a much more better, it's a more social, better connected place. And I think that makes us stand out in relative comparison to our competitors, and it makes a huge difference. So thank you for your time. Thank you to the panel. And before we leave, Linda Salem is going to come up with some housekeeping things.